During the Battle of Britain, de Havilland in the United Kingdom considered Canada as a possible emergency transfer area to bring its production of aircraft away from German bombing. So the de Havilland plant in Downsview, Toronto, was already considered for Mosquito Productions. So when the contract came to de Havilland Canada in September 1941, Canada was ready. And then the production began.
Behind us is a de Havilland Mosquito, a B-35, later converted to a PR-35. This is our beauty, stripped down to its absolute bare skin here. This is where you see the birch and the spruce ply in here, and over top of this, the entire airplane would have been fabric covered as well. And then that would have been doped and painted to give it the final finish.
Basically, it's made like a plastic model, a plastic model kit that we're accustomed with now as children building them. It's made in the same way, two halves coming out of a mold and sticking them together.
One of the things that was true about Mosquito Production is that it was in large measure a cottage industry. Small businesses all over England, and then later in Canada as we started up production, were building components for the Mosquito, and then all the components were brought together for final assembly.
In those days, there were many people in England who were used to working with wood, so you had the pool of craftsmen and you had this material that wasn't getting used.
The other neat thing that you can see while our airplane is in this condition is the fact that the entire fuselage is not much over ½ an inch thick. The key types of wood that comprised the Mosquito were balsa, birch wood, and spruce. Now, birch and spruce are grown in North America. A great deal of the wood that went into the production of British Mosquitoes came from the west coast of Canada. Balsa wood, of course, is tropical wood, mostly from Central and South America, the lightest wood in the world, and it was basically used as spacers, sandwiched between the plies of the wood. The fuselage production is perhaps one of the most interesting parts. They had great big molds that they would lay the sheets of plywood down, and they would strap them with great big metal straps, and then they were so light that it took only 2 people to lift half a Mosquito fuselage off the mold, and then they would put the 2 halves side by side, and people would install the electrical lines, the hydraulic lines, the instruments, and all of the equipment in each half of the fuselage.
Before they were stuck together, it was actually the female workforce that went along and wired and plumbed the inside of the fuselages.
And then the 2 halves were brought together, and so you had a single complete tube. Once the fuselage halves are glued together, a guy comes along with a handsaw and cuts this huge hole out of the center of the Mosquito.
The wing was slid underneath it. They dropped them on a moving platform. The payload was in the wing, the propulsion systems obviously. They're the load-bearing item. Basically, the fuselage just points the wing in the right direction.
The wings are built as a one-piece wing. In total, it's got a 54-foot wingspan, made as a single piece.
The wing is very complex. I mean, if you get into the structure of it, the woods are laminated in different directions to compensate for the torque of the engines. It was cutting edge in its time. This airplane was one of the first composite ones to come down the pipe.
The other thing about this airplane for the engineers here is that it's a monocoque construction, which means there's very little internal structure to the airplane. The strength of the airplane is in the skin, in the outer shell, just in the same way it is with an egg. In total, there were 7,781 Mosquitoes built, 1,134 of which were built in Canada during World War II, and about 200 were built in Australia. Canada had 1 airplane to work from as a model. They sent 1 over from England, parked it in the factory and said, make us a bunch of those.
The first Canadian Mosquito flew on September 24th, 1942, only 12 months after the contract began.
This was something nobody foresaw, and nobody thought it would be possible. But Canadian industrialists had met the challenge of the Second World War and had answered the call with flying colors. When the war ended, Canada had the 6th largest aircraft production in the world. 16,418 aircraft of various models had been produced in just a short span of 5 years in this country. You have to remember that in the previous 10 years, before the beginning of World War II, Canada had built less than 500 aircraft.